You know, in the financial world, when the world's oldest banking institution severs ties with a former head of state, it signals something deeper than a business decision. That's exactly where we are right now with the Vatican Bank's closure of Donald Trump's accounts. From an investor's perspective, this is less about one man's finances and more about institutional risk assessment. You see, the Vatican Bank doesn't make moves like this lightly. When a 500-year-old institution that survived two world wars and the fall of empires decides the reputational cost is too high, that tells you something fundamental has shifted. Structural instability doesn't always start with chaos. Sometimes it begins with quiet patterns we ignore for too long. What we're witnessing now matters to every single American, whether you follow politics closely or not, because when global financial institutions start treating a former U.S. president as a liability rather than an asset, the implications extend far beyond one person's account balance. Let me fill you in on something. In my 94 years, I've watched capital flow across borders, through wars, and across political divides. Capital doesn't lie. It moves toward stability and flees from risk. The Vatican Bank, officially known as the Institute for Religious Works, has survived centuries precisely because it understood one principle: reputation compounds like interest, and once it erodes, it rarely returns at the same value. According to multiple sources, including Politico's January 15th report and the Financial Times coverage on January 18th, the Vatican Bank notified Trump's legal team in late December that his accounts would be closed effective February 1st. Here's what makes this particularly telling. The Vatican Bank doesn't operate like Wells Fargo or Chase. You see, it's not chasing market share or quarterly earnings. It serves a very specific clientele: Catholic institutions, Vatican employees, and select individuals with documented ties to the church. The decision to open accounts for Trump in 2017, reportedly facilitated through his connections with conservative Catholic donors, was already unusual. The decision to close them now, that's unprecedented. Let's be real for a second. The Vatican Bank's move didn't happen in isolation. Over the past 18 months, we've seen a pattern emerge. Deutsche Bank, Trump's primary lender for decades, severed ties in 2021. Signature Bank closed his accounts after January 6th. Professional Bank in Florida followed suit. Now the Vatican Bank. You see, in corporate governance, when multiple institutions independently reach the same risk assessment, that's not coincidence. That's pattern recognition. According to legal expert Barbara McQuaid, a former U.S. attorney for the Eastern District of Michigan, who now teaches at the University of Michigan Law School, stated in a CNN interview on January 20th, "When financial institutions consistently classify an individual as high risk, it reflects a calculated assessment of legal exposure, reputational damage, and regulatory scrutiny." She added that this pattern creates a documented trail of institutional concern that prosecutors and investigators don't ignore. Here's where it gets interesting. The Vatican Bank's decision comes just 3 weeks after Pope Francis delivered unusually direct remarks about democratic accountability during his New Year's address. According to Vatican News reporting from January 1st, Francis warned that leaders who place personal power above the common good betray the sacred trust of governance. While the Vatican officially maintains the bank's decision was purely administrative, 3 separate sources close to the Holy See, speaking to Reuters on condition of anonymity, confirmed the accounts were flagged during a routine compliance review triggered by Trump's mounting legal challenges. You see, the Vatican Bank operates under some of the strictest anti-money laundering protocols in Europe, implemented after scandals in the 1980s nearly destroyed the institution. Their compliance officers, according to The Guardian's January 17th investigation, raised concerns about potential legal entanglements that could expose the bank to regulatory scrutiny from USA, European, and international financial authorities. Now here's the kicker. The specific trigger wasn't just Trump's legal troubles. It was the convergence of 3 separate risk factors that made the relationship untenable. First, the ongoing federal investigations into classified documents and election interference created what compliance experts call ongoing legal uncertainty. Second, Trump's businesses face civil fraud charges in New York, with Attorney General Letitia James seeking $370 million in penalties and a permanent ban from conducting business in the state. The trial, which concluded in January 2024, resulted in Judge Arthur Engoron ruling on February 16th that Trump had engaged in persistent fraud over a decade, systematically inflating asset values to deceive banks and insurers. Third, and this is what sealed it, the Vatican Bank's due diligence team discovered connections between Trump Organization accounts and investigations into foreign financial transactions that could implicate the bank in regulatory violations under European Union banking standards. Let me break this down because it's important. The Vatican Bank operates under what's called correspondent banking relationships. They don't process transactions directly in dollars. They work through intermediary banks in New York and London. You see, if those intermediary banks flag Trump-related transactions as high risk, which multiple sources confirm they have, the Vatican Bank faces a choice: maintain the relationship and risk losing access to the global financial system, or cut ties and preserve their institutional credibility. According to Patrick Smith, a Vatican financial affairs analyst quoted in The Atlantic on January 19th, the bank chose institutional survival over political loyalty, which tells you how serious the risk calculation became. But there's another layer here that nobody's talking about. 3 former Trump administration officials who served in national security roles have recently provided testimony to Special Counsel Jack Smith's investigation. According to NBC News reporting from January 12th, these officials described a pattern of behavior during Trump's presidency where foreign policy decisions appeared influenced by personal financial interests. One official, speaking under oath, testified that discussions about military aid to Ukraine in 2019 included explicit references to Trump's business dealings in the region. The Vatican Bank's compliance team, reviewing these public testimonies as part of their risk assessment, concluded that maintaining accounts for someone under federal investigation for potentially using public office for private gain violated their institutional ethics standards. For 250 years, American leaders understood one principle: public service demands separation from private enrichment. That's not idealism, that's structural necessity. When leaders blur that line, institutions that depend on credibility start calculating exit strategies. You see, the Vatican Bank isn't making a political statement. They're making a fiduciary one. In corporate terms, this is like a board of directors voting to remove a CEO, not because they dislike him, but because the liability exposure threatens the entire enterprise. The cost of association became greater than the benefit of loyalty. Here's the impossible catch-22 this creates for Trump. If he contests the closure publicly, he draws attention to the accounts and invites questions about why he needed Vatican banking services in the first place. Most Americans don't have Vatican bank accounts. Those who do typically have deep institutional ties to Catholic charities or Vatican operations. Trump's accounts, according to Financial Times sources, held between $5 million and $15 million, but the Vatican Bank won't confirm exact figures due to privacy rules. If he stays quiet, he accepts the institutional rebuke, which sets a precedent for other banks currently under pressure to evaluate their relationships with him. Either way, he loses leverage. The fracturing extends beyond banking. Conservative Catholic leaders who championed Trump's Supreme Court appointments are now divided. Cardinal Blase Kupish of Chicago, according to National Catholic Reporter coverage from January 14th, stated that financial institutions have a moral obligation to ensure their services don't enable corruption or undermine democratic principles. Meanwhile, Cardinal Timothy Dolan of New York defended Trump, calling the Vatican Bank's decision an overreach based on incomplete information. This split within American Catholic leadership reveals something deeper. The institutional coalition that elevated Trump is showing cracks under the weight of his legal troubles. On January 22nd, Judge Tanya Chutkan, overseeing the federal election interference case, issued a ruling that legal scholars are calling constitutionally indefensible for any argument of absolute presidential immunity. In her 48-page opinion, Chutkan wrote, "Presidents are not kings, and plaintiff is not president. The court cannot and will not condone criminal schemes to overturn valid election results." Conservative legal scholar J. Michael Luttig, a former federal appeals court judge appointed by George H.W. Bush, stated in a Washington Post op-ed on January 23rd that Chutkan's ruling correctly interprets the limits of executive power and establishes that no former president can claim immunity for criminal conduct regardless of when that conduct occurred. You see, when conservative constitutional experts validate prosecutorial action, it removes the partisan shield Trump has relied on for protection. The political fallout is already visible. According to a YouGov poll conducted January 18, 21, 62% of Americans believe financial institutions should have the right to refuse service based on legal risk assessment, with 38% opposing. Among Republicans specifically, 51% support institutional discretion, up from 34% in a similar poll from June 2023. The institutional damage extends to international credibility. European financial regulators, according to Bloomberg reporting from January 16th, have used the Vatican Bank's decision in private briefings with member states as evidence that American political instability now poses tangible financial system risks. You see, when our former leaders become compliance liabilities for global institutions, our diplomatic leverage erodes. The electoral impact matters too. Trump announced his 2024 candidacy in November 2022, and his campaign relies heavily on the perception of victimhood, framing every legal challenge as political persecution. But the Vatican Bank isn't the Justice Department. It's not Nancy Pelosi. It's not CNN. It's a centuries-old religious financial institution with no partisan agenda. When third-party validators like this make risk-based decisions, the victimhood narrative loses credibility with persuadable voters. According to election analyst David Wasserman at the Cook Political Report, cited in an NPR interview on January 21st, independent voters who might give Trump the benefit of the doubt on federal prosecutions are less forgiving when non-governmental institutions reach similar conclusions about his conduct. Not since Richard Nixon faced bank closures during Watergate has a former president experienced this level of institutional rejection from the financial sector. Nixon's accounts were frozen by 3 banks between March and June 1974, not because of political disagreements, but because the banks feared legal entanglement with someone under criminal investigation. The parallel is striking. You see, history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And the rhyme we're hearing now suggests that institutional patience with Trump has reached its limit. Here's what this means going forward. The next few weeks are crucial. If more financial institutions follow the Vatican Bank's lead, Trump's ability to fund legal defenses, maintain business operations, and finance a presidential campaign becomes exponentially more difficult. Cash flow is the lifeblood of any operation, political or commercial. When access to capital shrinks, options narrow. The stakes have never been higher, not just for Trump, but for the precedent we set about whether powerful individuals operate by the same rules as everyone else or exist in a separate category beyond institutional accountability. What we're watching isn't just about one former president's bank accounts. It's about whether institutional integrity still means something in America. You see, the Vatican Bank didn't make this decision lightly. 5 centuries of institutional memory informed their calculus. When they looked at the risk profile, the legal exposure, and the reputational cost, they concluded that maintaining the relationship threatened their fundamental mission. That's not politics. That's principle. And in both markets and governance, principle is the only asset that appreciates over time. The question now is whether other institutions have the courage to make similar assessments based on evidence rather than fear of political backlash. Because in any system, silence is a choice, and sometimes the most expensive choice of all.